I woke up Monday morning to my phone buzzing like an angry hornet on my nightstand. 7:30 a.m. and 3 missed calls from numbers I did not recognize. My stomach dropped before I even answered the fourth call. The voice on the other end belonged to Officer Martinez from Dallas PD, and his words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My car had been impounded, $24.80 in towing fees, abandoned behind some strip mall with front-end damage that looked like a hit and run. They wanted to question me about fleeing the scene of an accident that put someone in the hospital. I stood there in my boxer's coffee mug trembling in my hands, trying to process what he was telling me. My parents had borrowed my pristine 2022 Honda Accord Friday evening to take my sister Madison and her 3 kids to Six Flags for the weekend. They had not returned a single one of my calls since Saturday afternoon. The towing company operator sounded bored when I called, like she dealt with panicked car owners every day. She rattled off the details with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. My Honda had been discovered at 3:17 a.m. Sunday morning in the parking lot behind a row of closed shops on Elm Street in Dallas. Security guard found it with the driver's side door hanging open, engine still warm. Significant damage to the front bumper, broken left headlight, and what looked like motorcycle parts embedded in the grille. My hands shook as I scribbled down the impound lot address on a napkin. I had to borrow my roommate Derek's beat-up Ford pickup just to get there, and every mile felt like driving toward my own execution. The lot sat in an industrial part of town that smelled like motor oil and desperation. Chain link fence topped with razor wire surrounded rows of damaged, abandoned, and seized vehicles baking under the Texas sun. The attendant, a weathered man named Pete, with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, led me to my car with the casual indifference of someone who had seen every possible automotive disaster. When I saw my Honda, my knees nearly buckled. The front end looked like it had been through a blender. The pristine silver paint I had waxed every weekend was scraped and gouged. The bumper hung at an odd angle, and spiderweb cracks covered the windshield. Pete handed me a manila folder thick with photographs and paperwork. The pictures showed every angle of the damage, and each image felt like a punch to the gut. I had saved for 2 years to buy this car. 2 years of eating ramen noodles and skipping nights out with friends. 2 years of working overtime at my software development job, putting every extra dollar into my car fund. This Honda represented my independence, my responsibility, my careful planning for the future. Inside the car, the devastation continued. Empty beer bottles rolled around the floor. Fast food wrappers covered the seats. My sister's makeup was scattered across the dashboard foundation, smeared on the leather interior I had treated with conditioner every month. The smell of stale cigarettes and spilled alcohol made me gag. This was not how I had left my car when I handed the keys to my father Friday evening. Pete showed me witness statements from the strip mall security cameras. Around 3 a.m. Sunday, multiple people had been seen fleeing from my vehicle after what appeared to be a collision with a parked motorcycle in the adjacent lot. The witnesses described hearing shouting car doors slamming, and then silence as the group disappeared into the darkness on foot. My stomach churned as I opened the glove compartment to retrieve my registration. Mixed in with my carefully organized insurance papers and owner's manual, I found something that made my blood freeze. A crumpled receipt from Hartwell Fine Jewelry, dated Saturday afternoon. The purchase amount made my vision blur $4,200. The payment method listed made my heart stop completely. My American Express card. The card I'd given my parents for emergencies only. I stared at the receipt, reading it over and over, hoping the numbers would somehow change. But there it was. In black and white, a diamond tennis bracelet purchased at 2:47 p.m. on Saturday, charged to the credit card I had entrusted to my family for true emergencies. Medical bills, car repairs, genuine crises. not luxury jewelry shopping sprees while my car sat damaged and abandoned in a Dallas parking lot. The attendant watched me with something approaching sympathy as I processed what I had discovered. He had probably seen this before: families destroying each other's property and relationships over money status and selfish desires. But knowing I was not the first person to stand in this lot with my life falling apart around me did not make the pain any less sharp. I paid the towing fees with my debit card, watching my checking account balance plummet. $24.80 gone in an instant, money I had budgeted for groceries and utilities for the next month. Pete helped me fill out the release forms, and I drove my battered Honda home in silence, the broken headlight casting strange shadows on the road ahead. Every rattle and groan from the damaged engine felt like my family's betrayal speaking to me directly. The steering wheel pulled to the left from whatever collision had occurred. The radio no longer worked. Even the air conditioning wheezed and struggled to cool the interior on this scorching August afternoon in Austin. When I finally reached my apartment complex, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel and trying to understand how my life had changed so drastically in 72 hours. Friday evening, I had been a responsible 28-year-old with good credit, a reliable car, and a family I trusted. Now I was looking at thousands of dollars in repair bills, potential legal liability for a hit-and-run accident, and the devastating realization that the people closest to me had used and betrayed me without a second thought. The receipt from the jewelry store lay crumpled on my passenger seat, a paper monument to their selfishness. $4,200 for a bracelet, while they left my car damaged and abandoned like roadkill. The mathematics of their cruelty was precisely calculated in dollars and cents. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my parents' house in Cedar Park, a suburb north of Austin, where they had lived for 15 years. The neighborhood still looked like a postcard from the American dream: manicured lawns, two-story houses with attached garages and minivans in every driveway. My Honda's damaged front end looked obscenely out of place among the pristine suburban normalcy. I parked in their driveway and noticed fresh scratches on the concrete leading to the garage. Long, silvery gouges that looked suspiciously like someone had scraped a car bumper against the pavement. The garage door also showed new damage, a dent at bumper height, with traces of silver paint that matched my Honda's color exactly. My mother, Carol, answered the front door wearing her usual real estate agent uniform, crisp blazer, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that looked painted on. At 52, she maintained the polished appearance that helped her sell homes to young families moving to the suburbs. But today her smile faltered when she saw my expression. "Wayne, honey, what brings you by so early?" I held up the jewelry store receipt. "We need to talk, all of us, right now." She led me into their living room where my father, Bill, sat reading the newspaper in his recliner. At 55, he still carried himself with the authority of someone who had spent 30 years investigating insurance claims. His thick glasses and graying beard made him look distinguished, trustworthy. The kind of man you would believe when he told you a claim was legitimate. Madison sprawled on their couch, scrolling through her phone, with the practiced indifference of someone who had perfected the art of avoiding responsibility. At 30, my sister had never held a job for more than 6 months, but somehow always managed to look like she had stepped out of a magazine. Today she wore the diamond tennis bracelet from the receipt catching the morning light streaming through the windows. "Where's my car?" I asked, cutting through their small talk about the weather and neighborhood gossip. My mother's eyebrows rose in theatrical confusion. "Your car, sweetie. We returned it Sunday evening, left it right in your apartment complex parking lot just like you asked. We even put gas in it." "That's interesting," I said, pulling out my phone to show them photos from the impound lot. "Because it was found abandoned behind a strip mall in Dallas with significant collision damage. Someone fled the scene after hitting a motorcycle." Bill folded his newspaper and looked at me over his reading glasses with the condescending expression he had perfected during my childhood. "Wayne, Are you sure you didn't just misplace your keys? You know how careless you can be with your belongings. Someone probably stole it from your parking lot. The casual dismissal in his tone made my jaw clench. Even now faced with photographic evidence, they were treating me like an irresponsible child who could not keep track of his own possessions. The same way they had always treated me, actually. The responsible son who cleaned up messes, who worked hard, and never asked for anything, who could be counted on to handle problems quietly and efficiently. I found this in the glove compartment, I said, holding up the jewelry receipt. $4,200 charged to my emergency credit card. Madison finally looked up from her phone, and for just a moment, genuine panic flashed across her features. But she recovered quickly, transforming her expression into wounded innocence. Wayne, I have no idea what you're talking about. We never used your credit card for anything except gas money. Then explain the bracelet you're wearing, I said, pointing to her wrist. She looked down at the tennis bracelet as if seeing it for the first time. This old thing, I've had it for months. It's not even real diamonds. The lie came so easily that I wondered how many times she had practiced it. But I was not the naive younger brother who had believed her stories about borrowed clothes that never got returned, about temporary loans that became permanent gifts, about promises that evaporated like morning dew. I walked to the window and pointed at the damaged garage door. What about those fresh scrapes on your driveway? That dent in the garage door with silver paint that matches my car exactly. My father stood up from his recliner with the slow deliberation of someone buying time to construct a response. Wayne, you're being paranoid. That damage has been there for weeks. Some delivery truck must have backed into the door. But even as he spoke, I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew. His insurance investigator instincts were telling him to minimize, deflect, and deny until he understood the full scope of the evidence against him. That was when Madison exploded. You know what, fine, she screamed, jumping up from the couch with such sudden violence that her phone clattered to the floor. You want to know the truth? We borrowed your stupid car, and maybe it got a little banged up. Big deal. You owe us way more than one weekend of fun after everything we've done for you. The mask had finally slipped, revealing the entitled, selfish person underneath. But she was not finished. Do you have any idea how much money Mom and Dad spent raising you? How many times they bailed you out in college? How many family dinners they paid for? You act like you're so responsible and independent, but you've been living off their generosity your whole life. She was pacing now, gesturing wildly with the diamond bracelet, catching the light like a weapon. We deserve this. Madison deserves nice things. She's got 3 kids and a deadbeat ex who never pays child support. She works hard taking care of those babies. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to correct her obvious lies about working hard or taking care of her children. But they sat in silence, neither contradicting her nor supporting me. Their lack of response spoke louder than any words could have. So you think destroying my car and maxing out my credit card was justified? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison stopped pacing and looked at me with genuine confusion, as if she could not understand why I was upset about such trivial matters. Wayne, it's just money. You make good money at your computer job. You can afford it. We needed a family weekend, and you were too busy working to join us anyway. The casual dismissal of my career, my financial struggles, my careful budgeting, and my trust hit me like a physical blow. To them, I was not a person with my own dreams, needs, and limitations. I was a resource to be exploited when convenient. Besides, Madison added with a cruel smile, what are you going to do about it? Call the police on your own family? The challenge in her voice made my decision for me. She was right about one thing. I had been too passive, too accommodating, too willing to let them treat me as their personal ATM and cleanup crew. But that version of Wayne had died somewhere between the impound lot and this living room full of lies. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the garage door damage, the driveway scrapes, and Madison wearing the stolen bracelet, She lunged toward me, trying to grab the phone, but I stepped back and continued documenting the evidence. "You're really going to do this?" my father asked, standing up with his hands clenched into fists. "You're going to destroy this family over a car." The irony was not lost on me. They had already destroyed our family relationships with their lies, theft, and manipulation. I was just refusing to pretend everything was normal anymore. "I'm going to protect myself," I said, heading toward the front door. Something I should have started doing a long time ago. As I walked away, I could hear Madison screaming about ungrateful brothers and family loyalty, but her words felt powerless now. The spell of family obligation that had controlled me for 28 years had finally been broken by their own greed and cruelty. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, systematically going through every financial account I owned. What I discovered made the jewelry store receipt look like pocket change. My American Express statement showed a weekend spending spree that read like a fantasy vacation for people with unlimited money. Friday evening, $237 at a steakhouse in Dallas. The charges started innocently enough dinner for the family before their weekend adventure began, but Saturday morning brought a cascade of expenses that made my stomach churn. $460 at a luxury hotel spa, $612 at a high-end children's clothing store, $289 at a wine shop that specialized in bottles costing more than my weekly grocery budget. Then came the jewelry store purchase for $4,200, followed by cash advances totaling $2,700 from ATMs across Dallas. They had literally been pulling money from my credit line to fund their spending spree. The hotel charges showed they had upgraded to a penthouse suite after the car accident, as if damaging my vehicle had given them reason to celebrate rather than reason to come home and confess. Sunday's charges were even worse because they proved the family had continued spending after abandoning my damaged car. Brunch at a restaurant where the cheapest entree cost $45. Shopping at a designer outlet mall, more cash advances, a visit to an expensive salon where Madison had apparently gotten a full makeover to complement her stolen jewelry. The total damage, $8,900, charged to a credit card that had carried a zero balance for the past 6 months. I had only activated the card and added my parents as authorized users during my junior year of college, when I had been hospitalized with appendicitis. They had needed to pay for my medical expenses, and I had trusted them to use the card responsibly and pay it off immediately. That was 7 years ago. The card had been sitting in my desk drawer ever since forgotten until this weekend, when they had apparently decided my financial stability was less important than Madison's comfort and entertainment. I called American Express to dispute the charges, but the customer service representative delivered news that made my situation even worse. Because my parents were listed as authorized users on the account, all charges were technically legitimate from the bank's perspective. The card had been used by people with legal permission to access my credit line. "Sir, you would need to file a police report for fraud if you want to dispute charges made by your authorized users," the representative explained in a tone that suggested she dealt with family financial disputes regularly. "Otherwise, you're responsible for the full balance." But the worst news came when she explained how the sudden $8,900 balance had affected my credit score. The high utilization ratio had dropped my credit rating by 96 points overnight, from excellent credit to fair credit in a single weekend. This could impact your ability to rent apartments, get car loans, or even affect employment opportunities, she warned. Some employers run credit checks as part of their hiring process. I hung up and immediately called my apartment complex's leasing office. My lease was up for renewal at the end of September, and I had planned to sign the new contract that week. The conversation with Jennifer, the leasing manager, confirmed my worst fears. "Wayne, I'm so sorry, but your credit score doesn't meet our requirements for lease renewal," she said, genuine sympathy in her voice. The change was so dramatic that our corporate office flagged your application for manual review. They're requiring a cosigner or additional security deposit. The additional security deposit would be 3 months' rent, $4,500 I did not have thanks to my family's spending spree. And finding a cosigner meant admitting to someone else that my own family had sabotaged my financial stability for their entertainment. How long do I have? I asked, already knowing I would not like the answer. 30 days from when you receive the official notice. We'll send that out tomorrow. I hung up and stared at my laptop screen, watching my carefully planned life crumble in real time. In 3 days, my family had cost me nearly $15,000 when I combined the towing fees, credit card debt, estimated repair costs, and security deposit for a new apartment. They had also damaged my credit score so severely that finding housing would be a challenge even if I could scrape together the money for deposits and moving expenses. The mathematics of their betrayal was staggering. A weekend of fun for them had potentially made me homeless and financially ruined. But what hurt more than the money was the realization that they had planned this systematic exploitation. The timing, the use of the credit card, the casual way they had dismissed my concerns, all pointed to a coordinated effort to use me as their personal financing source. I opened my web browser and began researching tenant rights credit repair services and legal options for financial fraud. The responsible, careful person they had taken advantage of was about to become their worst nightmare. If they wanted to play financial games with my life, they were about to learn that I could play those games better than they could. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what they had done. The credit card statement only showed my expenses. I needed to know what other financial damage they had caused, what other lies they had told, and how long they had been planning this betrayal. I called my bank to check my checking and savings accounts. Both were untouched, but only because they did not have access to those accounts. The customer service representative confirmed that my parents had attempted to add themselves as authorized users on my checking account the previous month, but the request had been denied because I had not signed the authorization forms in person. They had been planning this for weeks, possibly months, systematically working to gain access to my finances while I naively trusted them with emergency access to a single credit card. The scope of their deception was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. As I sat in my kitchen surrounded by financial statements and legal research, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. My family had declared war on my financial stability and independence. Now I was going to fight back with every legal tool available to me. They had taught me a valuable lesson about trust and family loyalty. Now I was going to teach them a lesson about consequences and accountability. The naive, accommodating Wayne who cleaned up their messes without complaint was gone forever. In his place sat someone who understood that real love sometimes required saying no, setting boundaries, and refusing to enable destructive behavior. The war for my financial future was about to begin. Wednesday morning brought a phone call that transformed my anger into something approaching pure rage. Jennifer Walsh from my insurance company's claims department called to inform me that my hit and run claim had already been processed and approved. The payout of $3,200 for front-end collision damage had been deposited into an account 3 days earlier. The problem was I had never filed a claim. Mr. Wayne, according to our records, you contacted us Saturday evening to report a parking lot incident. Jennifer explained, reading from her computer screen. You stated that someone had sideswiped your vehicle in a shopping center parking lot and fled the scene. My father's voice echoed in my memory his calm authority when discussing insurance matters at family dinners. 30 years of investigating fraudulent claims had taught him exactly how to manipulate the system he was supposed to protect. Who did I supposedly speak with? I asked, already knowing the answer would implicate my father. The claim was filed by phone with our automated system using your policy number and personal information. The settlement was direct deposited to account number ending in 4789. I did not recognize that account number, but I was certain it belonged to my parents. They had used my identity, my policy, and my personal information to file a fraudulent insurance claim while I was unaware that my car had even been damaged. I need copies of all documentation related to this claim, I said. And I need to know what happens when an insurance adjuster files a false claim using someone else's identity. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough for me to understand that Jennifer had just realized the implications of my questions. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from routine customer service to careful legal caution. "Mr. Wayne, are you saying you did not file this claim?" "I'm saying my father filed a fraudulent claim using my information, while I was completely unaware that my car had been damaged. He's an insurance adjuster with Hartwell and Associates. Check your records." Another long pause. "Sir, I'm going to need to transfer you to our fraud investigation department. Please hold." While waiting on hold, I called Hartwell Fine Jewelry, the store where my family had purchased Madison's bracelet. The manager, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia, confirmed details that made my father's fraud even more elaborate. "Yes, I remember that transaction clearly," she said, when I described the Saturday afternoon purchase. "The gentleman was very specific about wanting our premium insurance coverage for the bracelet. He mentioned he was an insurance professional and understood the importance of protecting valuable jewelry. My father had not only stolen my money to buy Madison's bracelet, he had also bragged about his insurance expertise while doing it. The arrogance was breathtaking." "Did he mention anything about a car accident?" I asked. "Actually, yes. He said they had been in a minor fender bender earlier that day, but that his son's insurance would cover everything. He seemed very confident about how claims work." The fraud investigation department at my insurance company connected me with Detective Rodriguez, who specialized in internal fraud cases involving insurance industry employees. When I explained that my father was an adjuster who had filed a false claim using my identity, his interest became immediate and intense. "Mr. Wayne, this is potentially a felony. Insurance fraud by a licensed professional carries enhanced penalties. Can you email me all documentation you have?" I spent an hour scanning and sending documents, the jewelry receipt photos of my damaged car, the credit card statements, pictures of the garage damage at my parents' house, and recordings of my conversations with the impound lot and jewelry store. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Detective Rodriguez called me back 2 hours later with information that made my father's situation much worse. "We pulled security footage from the shopping center where your car was abandoned," he said. "Clear images of your father and sister removing personal belongings from the vehicle at 3:07 a.m. Sunday morning. Your father is clearly visible throwing beer bottles into a dumpster, presumably trying to eliminate evidence of drinking and driving. The footage also showed my father using his cell phone, probably calling in the fraudulent insurance claim, while standing next to my abandoned, damaged car. The prosecution case was building itself with video evidence and digital records that could not be explained away or denied. "There's something else," Detective Rodriguez continued. "We ran your father's name through our database of current investigations. He's already under review at his company for approving suspicious claims. Your case might be the evidence we need to prove a pattern of fraud." That afternoon, I received a call that made the insurance fraud seem like a minor problem. Attorney Marcus Chen represented the motorcyclist my car had struck during my family's weekend adventure. His client, David Kumar, was a 26-year-old graduate student who had been parked outside his apartment when my Honda plowed into his bike, sending him to the hospital with a broken leg and possible spinal injuries. "Mr. Wayne, my client is facing months of physical therapy and potential permanent mobility issues," Attorney Chen explained with the cold precision of someone who had handled dozens of hit-and-run cases. "His medical bills are approaching $20,000 and he's unable to work or attend classes. The liability was entirely mine regardless of who had been driving. My car, my insurance policy, my legal responsibility for any damage caused by my vehicle. David Kumar's injuries were serious enough that he was considering a civil lawsuit for $25,000 in damages, medical expenses, and pain and suffering. However, we're willing to consider a settlement if you can provide cooperation with the criminal investigation, Attorney Chen offered. My client wants justice for the person who left him bleeding in a parking lot, but he also needs financial compensation for his injuries. I spent that evening researching Texas hit-and-run laws, personal injury liability, and insurance fraud penalties. The legal consequences for my family were severe potential felony charges, professional license revocation, civil liability, and restitution payments that could bankrupt them. But I also discovered something that gave me hope. Texas law provided protection for vehicle owners when family members committed crimes using their cars without permission. If I could prove that my parents had used my vehicle without authorization for illegal activities, I might be able to limit my personal liability for David Kumar's injuries. The key would be demonstrating that I had not given them permission to drink and drive flea accident scenes or use my car for criminal activities. The evidence was all there: the unauthorized credit card usage, the fraudulent insurance claim, the abandonment of my vehicle, and the systematic deception about their activities. My family had not just stolen my money and damaged my property. They had potentially made me liable for serious injuries to an innocent person while they partied with my credit cards. The scope of their selfishness was so complete that they had risked destroying a stranger's life along with my own. But they had also made a crucial mistake. In their arrogance and entitlement, they had left a digital trail of evidence that proved their guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Every transaction, every phone call, every security camera had recorded their crimes in permanent, undeniable detail. The responsible, trustworthy son they had exploited was about to become the witness whose testimony would hold them accountable for every dollar stolen, every lie told, and every life damaged by their weekend of selfish entertainment. Justice was about to be served, and it would be delivered by the family member they had always underestimated and taken for granted. Thursday evening, my phone rang with Madison's number. I'd been expecting this call since Detective Rodriguez had contacted my parents that afternoon to schedule interviews about the insurance fraud investigation. But nothing could have prepared me for the conversation that followed. "Wayne, you need to drop this whole thing right now," Madison said without any greeting or pretense. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who was used to getting her way through intimidation and manipulation. "Drop what thing I asked already, recording the call on my phone. Don't play dumb with me." "The police called Mom and Dad today asking questions about your stupid car. You're trying to get your own family arrested over money." The audacity was stunning. They had stolen nearly $10,000, committed insurance fraud, left me liable for someone else's injuries, and destroyed my credit score. But somehow I was the villain for refusing to quietly absorb their damage. "Madison, you stole my credit card and maxed it out. Dad filed a fraudulent insurance claim. You left an injured person bleeding in a parking lot and fled the scene. Those are crimes, not family disputes." Her laugh was bitter and cold. "Crimes, Wayne, we're family. Families help each other. We needed a weekend getaway and you have money. It's not like we robbed a bank." The casual dismissal of their theft and fraud revealed everything I needed to know about Madison's moral compass. In her world, my financial resources existed for her convenience, and any resistance to her demands was selfish betrayal. "Well, since you want to play hardball, let me tell you what's going to happen," she continued, her tone shifting to pure threat. "You're going to call those insurance people and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You're going to pay off that credit card without complaining, and you're going to forget this whole thing ever happened. And if I don't, then I'm calling Grandma Ruth and telling her that you refused to help pay for Tyler's medical bills when he needed emergency surgery last month. I'll tell her you said her precious great-grandchildren weren't worth your money." My grandmother Ruth was 84 years old and lived on a fixed income in a senior community outside San Antonio. She adored Madison's children and had always believed that Madison was struggling to raise 3 kids as a single mother. Grandma Ruth had no idea that Madison spent her child's support money on clothes and entertainment while expecting everyone else to pay for her children's actual needs. "Tyler didn't have surgery last month," I said. "He had a minor emergency room visit for a playground injury that was covered by Medicaid. Grandma doesn't know that. And she won't believe you over me. You know how much she loves those babies. And she's always worried about them having enough money for doctors and school clothes." The threat was calculated to hit my deepest vulnerability. Grandma Ruth had raised me for 6 months when I was 12, and my parents were going through their divorce proceedings. She was the one person in our family who had shown me unconditional love without expecting anything in return. The idea of her thinking I had refused to help her great-grandchildren would break her heart and mine. "You're really going to lie to an 84-year-old woman to cover up your theft?" I asked. "I'm going to protect my family from someone who's forgotten what family loyalty means. And Wayne, it gets worse. I'm pregnant again, and this baby is going to need a lot of support. Medical bills, baby supplies, childcare expenses. I was hoping my successful brother would want to be involved in his new niece's life." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. First, emotional blackmail using Grandma Ruth. Then revelation of another pregnancy that would require my financial support. Madison was essentially demanding that I become the permanent funding source for her reproductive choices and lifestyle decisions. But I could hear voices in the background during our conversation, and one of them was clearly my father coaching her on what to say. At one point, I heard him whisper, "Tell him about the baby expenses and how families are supposed to support each other." "Madison, are Mom and Dad there with you right now?" A pause. "What does that matter?" "Because it sounds like they're telling you what to say, which means this whole conversation is a coordinated effort to manipulate me into dropping the fraud investigation. You're being paranoid. No one is telling me anything. I'm just trying to protect our family from your selfishness." But I could clearly hear my mother in the background saying, "Ask him about Christmas presents for the kids. Make sure he knows they'll be disappointed if Uncle Wayne doesn't care about them anymore." The family conspiracy was even more extensive than I had realized. This was not Madison acting alone in a desperate attempt to avoid consequences. This was a planned intervention designed to use every emotional manipulation they could devise to force me back into my role as their personal ATM and cleanup crew. "Madison, let me ask you something. How long have you been planning this?" "Planning what?" "The whole thing. The car, borrowing the credit card, spending the insurance fraud. How long have you and Mom and Dad been working together to steal my money?" Another pause longer this time. I could hear whispered conversation in the background, but the words were unclear. "Wayne, you're being ridiculous. We didn't plan anything. We just wanted a nice family weekend and things got a little out of hand." "Things got out of hand, Madison. You spent $9,000 in 2 days, abandoned my car after a hit and run accident, filed fraudulent insurance claims, and now you're trying to blackmail me using Grandma Ruth. That's not things getting out of hand. That's systematic theft and fraud." "Fine." She exploded, and suddenly the real Madison emerged from behind the manipulation. "You want to know the truth? Yes, we planned it. We've been planning it for months, ever since Jason cut us off and stopped answering our calls." The mention of our cousin Jason sent chills down my spine. Jason had distanced himself from the family 2 years earlier, and we'd all been told it was because of work stress and relationship problems. But Madison was revealing something entirely different. We needed money, Wayne. Real money, not just $20 here and there. Madison's got 3 kids and another one coming. Mom and Dad are facing foreclosure on the house because Dad's been having problems at work. We're drowning, and you're sitting there with your good job and your savings account acting like you don't owe us anything. The truth was pouring out now, and I could hear my parents in the background trying to stop her from saying too much. But Madison was past the point of careful manipulation. We researched how to add ourselves to your credit accounts. We timed this whole weekend for when you'd be busy with that work project and wouldn't notice the charges until Monday. We knew about your apartment lease renewal because Mom has friends in property management. We planned every detail because we needed this to work. And Jason. What did you do to Jason that made him cut contact? Same thing, basically. His credit cards, his savings account, some stock investments his grandfather left him. But Jason figured it out faster than we expected, and he hired lawyers and threatened to have us arrested. So we had to back off and wait for a better opportunity. The family pattern of financial abuse was now clear. They had systematically exploited Jason until he fought back. Then they had moved on to me as their next victim. I was not dealing with impulsive bad decisions or temporary desperation. I was dealing with practiced financial predators who happened to share my DNA. Madison, do you understand that what you're describing is criminal conspiracy to commit fraud? I understand that you're choosing strangers over your own family. That detective, that insurance investigator, that motorcycle guy who's probably faking his injuries for money, you're helping them destroy us instead of protecting the people who love you. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. But Madison had already revealed everything I needed to know. My family's betrayal was not a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was a calculated pattern of financial abuse that they had practiced on other family members and refined over time. They had studied my finances, planned their theft, coordinated their lies, and prepared their manipulation tactics in advance. The weekend at Six Flags was just the delivery method for a sophisticated fraud scheme they had been developing for months. But they had also made a fatal mistake in their arrogance. Madison had just confessed to criminal conspiracy, while my parents coached her in the background. Every word was recorded on my phone, providing evidence that would support criminal charges and civil lawsuits. The naive younger brother, who had cleaned up their messes and believed their excuses, was gone forever. In his place sat someone who finally understood that enabling destructive behavior was not love, and that real families do not systematically exploit each other for financial gain. My war against their manipulation had just gained the most powerful weapon possible, their own confession recorded in their own words, proving their guilt beyond any possible doubt. Friday morning, I sat in the office of attorney Sarah Martinez, a family law specialist who had been recommended by Detective Rodriguez. Her office was located in a downtown Austin high-rise, and the view of the city skyline reminded me that there was a whole world beyond my family's toxic manipulation. Sarah listened to the recordings of my conversation with Madison while taking detailed notes. When the audio finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head in what appeared to be professional amazement. Wayne, in 20 years of family law practice, I've never heard such a clear confession to criminal conspiracy. Your sister essentially provided a complete roadmap of their fraud operation, including admission of prior victims and premeditation. She explained my legal options with the precision of someone who had handled similar cases involving financial abuse between family members. Criminal charges for fraud and identity theft were almost certain to be filed based on the evidence. Civil recovery of stolen funds was also highly likely, potentially including punitive damages for the systematic nature of their theft. But there's something else we need to discuss, Sarah continued. Your sister mentioned that your parents are facing foreclosure. We should investigate their financial situation to understand their motivations and ensure they still have assets available for restitution. That afternoon, I met with my cousin Jason for the first time in 2 years. He drove down from Dallas, and we sat in a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus, where we had both attended college. Jason was 32, 4 years older than me, and worked as an electrical engineer for a renewable energy company. The conversation was like looking into my own future if I had not fought back against our family's manipulation. They got me for about $15,000 over 6 months. Jason explained, stirring his coffee, with the mechanical precision of someone who had told this story before. Started small with emergency loans that were never repaid. Then they added themselves to one of my credit cards for a family vacation. By the time I realized what was happening, they had nearly destroyed my credit score and emptied my savings account. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I tried, Wayne. I called you in December and tried to explain what had happened, but you didn't believe me. You said I was probably misunderstanding their intentions, that family disagreements could usually be resolved with communication." The memory came back to me clearly. Jason's phone call about family financial problems that I had dismissed as personality conflicts and poor communication. I had even defended our parents to him, explaining how generous and supportive they had always been with my education and career. "They're very good at this," Jason continued. "They study their victims, they plan their approach, and they have backup manipulation tactics for every possible response." When I threatened legal action, Madison called my girlfriend at the time and told her I was being financially abusive to my own elderly parents. Did she believe Madison? She broke up with me 2 days later. Said she couldn't be with someone who would sue his own family over money. Madison and Mom had convinced her that I was greedy and ungrateful, that our parents were struggling financially because of medical bills. The scope of their manipulation was even broader than I had realized. They did not just steal money and file fraudulent claims. They systematically destroyed relationships and reputations to protect themselves from consequences. But here's what you need to understand, Wayne. Fighting back was the best decision I ever made. It took 2 years, but I recovered financially and emotionally. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize manipulation, and to prioritize my own well-being over their demands. Jason agreed to provide testimony and documentation for both the criminal case and civil lawsuit. His records showed a clear pattern of the same techniques they had used against me: unauthorized credit card usage, fraudulent emergency claims, and emotional manipulation involving other family members. Together, we can prove this was a systematic operation, not isolated incidents, Sarah explained when Jason and I met with her that evening. That strengthens both the criminal case and our civil recovery options. But the most significant development came Monday morning, when Detective Rodriguez called with news about my father's employment situation. "Wayne, your father was terminated from his job this morning. The insurance company's internal investigation found evidence of 12 fraudulent claims he had approved over the past 18 months, including several involving relatives and personal friends. Bill's insurance license was also being suspended pending a state investigation into professional misconduct. The career he had built over 30 years was effectively over, and his professional reputation was destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. There's more," Detective Rodriguez continued. "We found evidence that your parents took out a second mortgage on their house 6 months ago for $60,000. The money appears to have been spent on lifestyle expenses and debt payments rather than home improvements or investments. The foreclosure Madison had mentioned was not just a possibility, it was inevitable. My parents had borrowed against their house to fund their spending habits, and now they were unable to make the mortgage payments. The financial pressure had driven them to increasingly desperate theft from family members. The prosecutor is prepared to offer a plea bargain," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Full restitution to you and Jason Community Service probation and professional sanctions. In exchange, they avoid jail time and felony convictions." I asked for time to consider the offer. Part of me wanted them to face the full consequences of their actions, including possible imprisonment. But another part recognized that destroying them completely would not repair the damage they had done to our family relationships. That evening, I called David Kumar, the motorcyclist who had been injured when my family fled their accident scene. He was a graduate student in engineering at UT Dallas, 26 years old, originally from California. His injuries were healing, but slowly. "I want you to know that I had no idea what my family had done until after the fact I told him. I'm cooperating fully with the criminal investigation, and I want to make sure you're compensated for your injuries and expenses." Wayne. I appreciate that call, David said. My lawyer told me about the situation with your family. I just want justice and enough money to cover my medical bills and lost wages. We agreed on a settlement that would cover his expenses without bankrupting me. My insurance company would handle most of the medical costs, and I would pay for his lost wages and pain and suffering from my civil recovery against my parents. As I sat in my apartment that evening, reviewing legal documents and financial calculations, I realized that my life had fundamentally changed in ways that went far beyond money and credit scores. I had learned to recognize manipulation to set boundaries and to prioritize my own well-being over dysfunctional family dynamics. The naive, accommodating Wayne who had enabled their destructive behavior was gone forever. In his place was someone who understood that real love sometimes required saying no, holding people accountable, and refusing to participate in toxic relationships. My family had taught me valuable lessons about trust boundaries and self-respect. Now I was going to teach them equally valuable lessons about consequences, accountability, and the difference between love and exploitation. The war was almost over, and justice was about to be served with the cold precision of legal documents and court orders that could not be manipulated, negotiated, or dismissed. 6 months later, I stood in the hallway outside Courtroom C in the Travis County Courthouse, watching my parents sign the final restitution agreement that would close this chapter of our lives forever. Bill's once confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who had lost everything he had spent 30 years building. Carol's perfectly styled appearance had given way to the tired look of someone facing bankruptcy and social embarrassment. The legal resolution had been swift and thorough. Bill pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and identity theft, receiving 2 years probation and a permanent ban from working in the insurance industry. Carol was charged as an accessory for helping to conceal the fraudulent transactions, receiving 1 year probation and community service. Madison avoided criminal charges by agreeing to testify against our parents and enter a drug treatment program. The civil lawsuit had been even more devastating to their finances. The judge awarded Jason and me full restitution plus punitive damages totaling $42,000. Their house had been sold to pay the settlement, and they were now renting a small apartment in a less expensive part of town. But the most satisfying justice had been watching their elaborate manipulation system collapse under the weight of legal scrutiny. The prosecutors had obtained search warrants for their financial records, revealing additional victims they had exploited over the years. 3 of Bill's co-workers had provided testimony about suspicious insurance claims. 2 of Carol's real estate clients had complained about missing security deposits that were never properly accounted for. The pattern of financial abuse extended far beyond our family, and their prosecution had protected future victims from their schemes. David Kumar's recovery had been slower than expected, but he was finally able to return to his graduate studies. The settlement I had negotiated covered all his medical expenses and provided compensation for 6 months of lost wages and academic delays. We had actually become friends during the legal process, bonding over our shared experience of being victimized by people we should have been able to trust. Wayne, I want you to know that your family's actions led to some positive changes in my life, David told me during our final meeting. The physical therapy made me stronger than I was before the accident, and the legal process taught me to advocate for myself more effectively. My own recovery had been equally transformative. The credit card debt had been completely forgiven as part of the fraud settlement. My credit score had been restored to its previous excellent rating, with a formal letter from the bank explaining that the damage had been caused by identity theft rather than irresponsible spending. I had found a new apartment in a better neighborhood, actually upgrading my living situation thanks to the civil settlement money. The damaged Honda had been repaired and was running better than ever. More importantly, I had been promoted at work after my supervisor learned about how I had handled the legal situation with professionalism and determination. You showed real character in a difficult situation, he had said during my performance review. The way you stood up for yourself while still treating your family with respect demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership qualities we value here. The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Grandma Ruth. Madison had indeed tried to poison her against me with lies about refusing to help with medical bills. But when the truth came out during the court proceedings, Grandma Ruth had been devastated to learn how Madison had manipulated her emotions to protect criminal behavior. "Wayne, honey, I'm so proud of you for standing up for what was right," she had told me during our weekly phone calls that had resumed after a 3-month silence. "It took courage to hold your own family accountable, and it was the loving thing to do even when it was painful." Grandma Ruth had actually cut off financial support to Madison, entirely redirecting her assistance to a trust fund for Madison's children that could not be accessed for adult entertainment or luxury purchases. Madison's drug treatment had revealed the extent of her substance abuse problems that had been funded by stolen money from family members. The expensive jewelry, clothes, and entertainment had been covering up a serious cocaine addiction that had been escalating for months. Getting caught had actually forced her into treatment that probably saved her life. "I'm not ready to apologize yet," she had told me during a supervised phone call from her treatment facility. "But I'm starting to understand how my choices hurt people who didn't deserve it. Maybe someday we can have a relationship based on honesty instead of me always asking you for money." It was more self-awareness than Madison had ever shown before, and it gave me hope that recovery was possible for our family relationships if everyone was willing to do the necessary work. But the most profound change had been in my understanding of what family really meant. I had learned that real love required boundaries, that enabling destructive behavior was not kindness, and that sometimes protecting yourself was the most loving thing you could do for everyone involved. Jason and I had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. We had started hosting monthly dinners for other family members who had been affected by our parents' manipulation, creating a support network for people learning to set healthy boundaries. "You know what's interesting?" Jason had observed during one of our conversations. "We have a better family relationship now that we're not afraid to say no to each other. When you remove the financial manipulation and guilt trips, you can actually discover if you genuinely like someone." My dating life had also improved significantly. The confidence I had gained from handling the legal situation successfully had translated into better relationships with colleagues, friends, and romantic interests. Women were attracted to someone who stood up for himself and handled difficult situations with integrity rather than passive accommodation. "You're different from when we first started dating," my girlfriend Emma had told me recently. "More confident, more decisive. You know what you want, and you're not afraid to ask for it or work for it." The financial recovery had exceeded my expectations. Between the civil settlement insurance reimbursements and my promotion at work, I was actually in better financial shape than before the theft had occurred. I had used the experience to learn about investment planning, legal protections, and financial security strategies. Most importantly, I had established legal structures to prevent future exploitation. New bank accounts with additional security measures. A will and estate plan that protected my assets. Powers of attorney limited to specific circumstances and trusted individuals outside my immediate family. "You've essentially built a financial fortress," my lawyer Sarah had explained during our final meeting. "Your family or anyone else will never again be able to access your resources without explicit documented permission." As I walked out of the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a sense of closure that went deeper than financial recovery or legal victory. I had learned that justice was not about revenge or punishment. It was about accountability boundaries and creating conditions where healthy relationships could develop based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Kumar. "Wayne just got accepted to a PhD program at MIT. Thank you for turning a terrible situation into an opportunity for growth. Your integrity made all the difference." That evening, I sat on my balcony overlooking Austin's skyline, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. The naive young man who had handed over his car keys and credit card to people who saw him as a resource rather than a person was gone forever. In his place was someone who understood his own worth, who could recognize manipulation, and who was committed to building relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. I still loved my parents and sister, but I loved them enough to hold them accountable for their choices. Real love sometimes meant saying no, setting boundaries, and refusing to enable destructive behavior. The pain of family conflict had been worth the growth that came from standing up for what was right. The damaged relationships were slowly healing, but on healthier terms. My parents were learning to live within their means and to ask for help honestly when they needed it. Madison was working through her addiction and learning to take responsibility for her choices. Most importantly, everyone was beginning to understand that family loyalty did not require financial exploitation or emotional manipulation. As I watched the sun set over the city where I'd built a new life, based on integrity and self-respect, I realized that my family's betrayal had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to develop strength I did not know I possessed to learn lessons about boundaries and self-advocacy that would serve me for the rest of my life. The boy who had always cleaned up other people's messes had become a man who created his own success through hard work, honest relationships, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The theft of my money and credit had led to the recovery of something much more valuable: my self-respect, my independence, and my understanding of what real love actually looked like. Some lessons could only be learned through pain, but the growth that came from surviving that pain was worth every difficult moment of the journey from victim to victor. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from financial or emotional manipulation? How did you handle the situation, and what lessons did you learn about setting boundaries with people you love? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who is struggling with similar difficult choices. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find these important discussions about family relationships and personal boundaries. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about overcoming challenges and building stronger, healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding how to recognize manipulation and protect themselves while still maintaining love and compassion for family members who make destructive choices. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior, even when that choice is painful and difficult. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in the power of personal growth, accountability, and the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. Until next time, remember that your worth is not determined by what others can take from you, but by the strength of character you show when you're tested by life.